Today we talk about Warriors of Japan, a war game by MMP Games that covers Japanese warfare in the 14th century. However, before we talk about Warriors of Japan, it is necessary that we talk a little bit about Warriors of God, and references to Warriors of God will be common in this video. Warriors of God came out for MMP a couple of years ago. It's a game that people really like or don't like much because it has some unique aspects to it. In particular, since it covers the 100 Years' War, it covers several generations, and it has a random mechanism to determine how long the players will be able to keep control of certain commanders across the span of time of the battle. Basically, you have turns that represent campaigns in which people go around and do stuff, and then you have these breaks in which people are just staying around their castles, trying to survive, but due to the hygienic conditions of the time, sometimes people will die very early, and then unpredictably some other commanders will live for a very long time. So you have this very peculiar depiction, but to me very interesting, of a long span of time where a lot of the time is not about battles, but then you have these campaigns. And what happens between campaigns is what brings a lot of randomness to the design. You have to react to the fact that the enemy commanders seem to live forever and your commanders disappear into thin air. Now, however, anybody that played Warriors of God when it came out knew that was in truth the second game in a system, and the first game was Warriors of Japan. So in the Western world, the game was originally published in Japan. In the Western world, this looks like the sequel to Warriors of God. In truth, it's the other way around. This is the original game, and Warriors of God was the second installment, even though in the US we saw these two games in a separate order. So here we have the original game that later was reworked and given a different theme in Warriors of God. Today we talk about Warriors of Japan, area impulse game that relies on pretty much the same concepts and the same general mechanics of Warriors of God. Again, in truth, it is this one that relies on the mechanics of this one, but so be it. This is how we saw it, and this is how we'll talk about Warriors of God. I'll try to keep in mind that this is not the sequel, this is the first installment, and I'll try to remind you too. In any case, let's talk about Warriors of Japan. Here you have a look at the map of the game. Somehow I can't keep the glare out of the picture. The map reflects the light from the lamps on the ceiling, but here at least I think you can see the main area, which is what really matters. This is the playable area. The map is divided in areas, and there are different connections. Units will move across borders. Borders may be connected through a road or not. Let me see one that isn't. Well, that border there is not connected by a road. This one is. And then you also have some sea connections. It is a large paper map. It is large enough, meaning it is large like you can expect from a modern non-monster war game. However, it is not large enough for this game because the board will end up being very cluttered. Actually, you will hear that one of my main complaints about the production of this game is that the board is very cluttered, and that somewhat gets in the way of enjoying the game. It just makes playing the game more complicated than it should, at least at a procedural mechanical level. So either the map is not big enough or the counters are too big, and in truth that is the problem, because if you had a larger map then you would need a very large play area. So it's a map that would be large enough for most games if the games didn't have such large counters. But talking about the counters, let's have a closer look at the map and at how the game works. Combat units. There are two types of combat units in the game. One is generic soldiers, and the other one is samurais, that are the commanders. Generic soldiers are represented by these generic counters, very nice art, mind you. But all that really matters here is the number printed on them, and you can give change any way you want. They're completely interchangeable, only the number matters. These are nice large counters, thick, just the same quality that if you play Warriors of God you have seen there. Really nice, but as I already said in my introduction, just a little too large. If in a region such as this one, which is one of the largest regions on the map, you have 8 stacks of units, as you can see, things can get pretty cluttered quite easily. The other type of units that you have is the samurai, as I said. Samurais may belong to the southern court, light blue, northern court, red, or they may be neutral, in which case they are gray. They have a number of stars, or really stains of ink, that indicates the rank. The more stars are there, the higher is the rank. The soldiers that you see on the board always need to be accompanied by samurais, and the number of combat points that a samurai can control is equal to the ranking times 2. So this guy can control up to 4 combat points, this guy only 2, this guy only 2, and so on and so forth. Other ratings here are the bravery rating in the red circle and the battle rating, which indicates the number of troops that commander can effectively bring into battle. Like in Wars of God, you may have cases where you have a commander that has a large army but can only bring into battle effectively a smaller number. But it's still good to have a lot of people waiting there so that they may replace the ones that are eliminated earlier. So, the game is divided in impulses. At the beginning of a turn, the players roll 2 dice, 1 per player. Oh, wow. The player with the highest result, with the highest roll, is the initiative player, and you set the initiative counter on the initiative track with the side that won the initiative face up. The lower result is used to determine the number of impulses that the players will receive. The initiative player receives that number plus 1. The non-initiative player receives only that number. In this case, the initiative player gets 2 impulses and the non-initiative player gets 1 in this turn. So, once you have determined initiative, the players will alternate using impulses, and an impulse can be used to move or to pass. When you use an impulse to move, you can move a number of your units from a region to an adjacent region. So use an impulse to choose a region and to move units out of that region into another region. You can move up to 4 units across a road connection and only 2 units in other types of connections to move through other types of border. And then some borders are simply impassable. So players will alternate moving or passing, and after all the movement impulses have been used, you will resolve battles in all regions that contain soldiers, that contain forces belonging to both sides. It's very classic, it's a very typical situation or turn structure where you have movement first and then combat in all contested regions. Combat and is really the most complex element in the game. I think half of the rulebook is about describing the combat procedure, and it is not that complex of a procedure. That is, the game is pretty straightforward. Now, when you resolve combat, first you need to take or to go through the betrayal step. A player can try to convince a samurai of the opposing side to switch to their side. In which case, you choose one of your samurai that will try to parlay with one of the opponents. You choose the target samurai that you're trying to convince to betray and switch to your side. You roll a die, modifiers may apply, and you convince the opponent to join your side if the number that you rolled is equal to or higher than the difference in ranking between your samurai and that of the opponent. That means you need to have somebody who has a higher ranking than the opponent to be able to do that at all. So if the difference between my samurai and that of the opponent is 1, to my advantage of course, I roll a 1, then I convince the opponent to betray that samurai, to betray and switch to my side. So after a while, you may have forces that have samurais of all color, and that, of course, means that you will need markers, counters to determine, just to mark who exactly is in control of each group. And again, when you have a region that is cluttered with a lot of people, all colors, not much room around, it just gets, I don't know, well, playing the game becomes more complicated than it should be, simply from the practical, pragmatical point of view. All that would have needed to be done would have been to have smaller counters, like traditional size in war games. Then I can clearly place all of mine in one area and all of yours in another area. Very simple, very easy, more intuitive than to have to go through each region and say, okay, this is, I think this is, yeah, this one is mine. Doesn't that one switch side next turn? I don't know. So you have that. First, you have the attempt of a betrayal. Both players can try to convince one of the opposing samurai to switch to their side. Actually, the same guy can go back and forth in the same battle. An opponent steals it from you, and then the other side steals him back the same turn. Totally possible. Then you determine the battle commander. The battle commander, it's very important. Each side determines one, and then players determine the number of dice that they will roll. The number of dice is equal to the lowest of the following, which is either the battle rating or the number of combat points in that army. And each samurai, for that purpose, counts as a combat point. You have to remember that. Which means that if this guy, suppose that this guy is alone, actually suppose that this guy is defending all alone, he has a battle rating of 5, but only 2 combat troops, then he only will roll 2 dice, because the lowest is 2. If he had, well, that's all he can carry, but suppose that there is this situation here. Now we have this guy. Suppose that he's a commander. Or he's a commander. Doesn't matter. There are more than 5. There are more than 5 combat points involved in this battle on this side. Then we can use the 5. Meaning there is a larger army and he takes 5 and he brings them to battle. And of course, if there is less than 5, then that's all he has. This is why the lowest of the 2 makes sense. So this side, for example, will roll 5 dice. So each side determines the number of dice that they roll. Also, you determine a modifier. The difference between the bravery rating of your commander and that of the opponent becomes a modifier. If the 2 sides have the same rating in bravery, then there is no modifier. If, for example, my bravery rating is higher than yours by 1, suppose that's my commander and that's yours, then I have that difference to my advantage. So in this case, if this is the fight, and these are 2 commanders, this side gets a +1 on all of the die rolls. So you roll the dice, the number we determined earlier, bonuses, differences we determined based on bravery, and then after you roll, each six that is rolled is a hit that the opponent takes. For each hit, you eliminate a combat point, a power point, whatever is the technical name, I don't even remember. For each hit, you remove a combat point, which you may remove from the troops, or if a samurai doesn't have any troop with him anymore, then you can remove the samurai himself. When you remove a samurai, you roll on a table, which is the samurai loss table. There may be modifiers that apply. Also, all the tables here are written in this sort of like neat, fake handwriting, like it was written with a brush, which is cute, but frankly can be a little irritating and not that easy to read. And as you can see, this is really the style of every player aid printed on the map. So the samurai loss table tells you what happens when a samurai is eliminated. The samurai may rout, simply leaves the board, and that is not that bad of a result. Well, the samurai needs to leave anyways because the samurai took a loss. But 3 or 4, the samurai is dead and there may be a successor. Then you check the back of the side to see there is a successor. And there is a successor, then you roll to see what that successor does. Rout and betrayal, the samurai leaves the battle, but then he goes to an enemy holding box. To the enemy holding box of the enemy's home region, and if there is immediate betrayal, then the enemy does switch side, but it doesn't go to a holding box. It is available immediately. Switch a side in the middle of the battle. So that's bad. That's really pretty bad. And if it is a 2-star or 3-star samurai that is rolling on the table, the opponent scores victory points. You score victory points in this game by controlling regions and by routing / taking control of enemy samurais. After a round of battle, if region is completely clean, suppose that was the battle and everybody was eliminated, well, I guess that the battle is over. If only one side remains, then also the battle is over. If there are still forces belonging to both sides in the region, then players have a chance of retreating. And you simply follow pretty standard tradition, pretty standard rules about retreating, where you can go, where you cannot go. But before the samurais that are retreating can do that, the enemy may conduct a final battle round against the retreating samurais. Also, because of border limits, you may not be able to retreat all of your samurais. And if you leave people behind, they will be pretty annoyed and they will betray you and join the opposite side. After all battles have been resolved, you determine control of regions, similar to what you have in Warriors of God. You may or may not be able to take control of a region, even if you are the only player that has samurais there. If it is an uncontrolled region, you become the controller if the region is the samurai's home region, or otherwise you need to roll a die and you become the controller. You take control of the region if the die roll shows a number which is equal to or less than the ratings of the samurai, that is the number of stars. So sometimes you have lower rankings samurais that take control of a region, and then they're waiting for somebody with a better rank to come around, show off, convince the locals that it's a good idea to join that side. So fun idea, fun mechanic. Then players get to recruit new samurais, so you get new generics that you assign to your forces. The turn is over, and you continue like this until one of the players reaches 10 victory points. It's one of those games where you have a relative differential of victory points, so you have a victory counter that moves back and forth from the victory track. The first player to reach 10 is the winner of the game, and you score victory points, as I said, during battle if a player is rolling on the samurai loss table, or also for control of regions. Control of this region here scores 3 victory points. Control of the home region of the opponent scores 2 victory points, and all other regions are worth a victory point each. In my conclusions, I'll try to give a sense of what Warriors of Japan is and how it plays in itself, but of course I'll make comparisons to Warriors of God, simply because there is another game out there which is very similar, and so if you see something here that you don't like, maybe that a game will suit your needs better. Warriors of Japan. If you play Warriors of God, it is good. It is a good game because it relies on the same solid ideas that you have there. I like the air impulse, I like the variable number of impulses that you have, I like the predictability that comes from that aspect. There may be a lot of impulses one turn, and again I see each turn as a campaign and not many impulses in the other campaign, so you hope for a long campaign because you're trying to take advantage. You gain some momentum, you want to keep it up, and then it just so happens that turn there aren't many impulses, and the opposite of course will be true. You want an impulse to be short because you would like to get more reinforcements at the end of the turn, but the opponent actually gets to have a lot of impulses that turn. So nice and predictable element there. The battle, when you read the procedure and you start playing it, at the beginning may feel a little tedious because in some cases you will have to roll many times. But if you play games that have the bucket of dice idea, where you roll many turns and it's not that easy to score a hit, you only score it on a 6, with modifiers of course, but most of the die rolls will result in misses. So it's different from when you roll on a combat table. A single roll tells you what happened in the battle. So as you first approach the system, you may worry that the battles will take forever, and some battles may take for quite a while, but who cares because the battles are tense. precisely because of the protracted nature of each battle resolution. Then you have a narrative curve, then you have a back and forth in which your commander seems to be ahead, and then actually, and you may be able to keep your advantage for a while, but you see that people are starting to crumble. The number of units that you have starts slightly to dissolve, and you have to find the right moment if you feel that you're the doomed player to retreat, not too early, not too late, so you're not completely destroyed, you're not left without sources for the rest of the campaign, but also, of course, do not retreat too early, because leaving people behind is not that great of an idea. So you have this back and forth in which your players may feel that they are ahead, and then a couple of bad rolls puts them behind, so very nice tension there. You have also the random element, the unpredictable element that comes from betrayal at the beginning. The best laid plans of man and samurai can go completely astray, so I like that element. It seems to me, however, that the game could have been so much better if the production had more of an eye to the playability rather than the aesthetics. And you have had a sense of this in the main segment of my video. I like to look at all the fake handwriting on the map. I do not like the fact that actually that's material that they need to use and it's not that easy to read. Not every wargamer is 20 anymore, especially those that play war games in the golden age of wargaming, and small fake handwriting can maybe not all that easy to read. Setup is a bit of a pain and could have been eased by having each region marked by a single symbol. Yeah, you have various symbols representing the different houses that live there. It's very cute, it feels historical, I guess, even though I didn't check if each symbol really corresponds to that region historically, but it feels historical that that region is shared by various families, but that means that you have to go through all regions with all pieces to figure out which region is where, as opposed, I don't know, if the regions have been marked with numbers or with letters in other ways, it would have been easier. And these are not regions, families. Oh yeah, this is the family such and such. Everybody knows that it's set up in that region. At least in the Western world, we do not really know where each noble is supposed to go. So the map doesn't really facilitate that. But to me, the big problem is clutter. To me, the big problem is simply that there are so many units on the board, so many stacks. And given to the swingy nature of the system of alliances that the game portrays, which is beautiful, but due to this, then you will have players controlling various groups of units that have pieces of various colors, and that becomes complicated when the board is already as cluttered as is, and then you need to pick up the pieces also to check how many units you have. The best way, of course, is simply to offset the bottom counters with the number of combat points that you have and the samurais, but that takes even more space. And the regions that I showed you are not the smallest regions on the map, so that to me is simply a problem. That it makes playing the game too complicated. When I play a wargame, I want to concentrate on the mechanics, on the strategy, on the narrative. I do not want to have to worry about these stacks that get messy, get in each other's way physically, materially. So that I just feel that the production mars somewhat gameplay. Now, comparisons with Warriors of God. The game is much more reliable than Warriors of God. It has less of a random element. Yes, you have unpredictable betrayals back and forth, but in Warriors of God it was hard to look ahead. It was hard to see what would happen in the future. As you're playing a turn, you're not just trying to take control of this or that region, but you're trying to think about all the possible consequences of death and survival of various commanders. I'm taking control of this region, but I know that maybe this or that other problem later. It's a really fun mechanic if you embrace it, if you accept the fact that Warriors of God is not about grand strategy, because in truth no one should have a grand strategy for a contest that has lasted through several generations. It should be about reacting to various situations if you're looking at the coverage of the war or the conflict in its entirety. So you do not have this in Warriors of Japan that covers a much shorter span of time. And so that's an element that allows you to have a larger strategy, to makes the game worth one that is worth thinking about in certain terms, again in terms of planning, of longer planning, rather than just trying to plan about what happens if that disastrous thing happens between turns. So there is that satisfying element there. However, to me, there is another element of Warriors of Japan which makes it a little less interesting than Warriors of God, which is the map. And that's nobody's fault that Japan is more of a long strip of land and France is like a rectangle. But just the map of Warriors of God has many more areas in it, many more playable areas, many more areas that are adjacent to one another, just a more interesting system of possible expansions. So during the game, you will see various areas changing control and various shapes will shift around as a certain control arises in an area. Then you see the area changing and switching, etc., etc. It's just much more interesting. As force is also interesting that it's hard to keep control of central France because people can pound you from all directions. Here the map feels a little more claustrophobic, and again it is simply due to the different historical setting. There is nothing, or not much, that could be done, I guess, unless you divided that map in smaller areas, playing with the scale a little bit. But the point is simply, game-wise, play-wise, Warriors of Japan may be historical, maybe more historical than the other game, but I do not know much about the history of this period, so I cannot say that. But it may have more of a historical feel, and due to the geography, it has certain constraints, but simply the map is less fun to play. That is, we can use all of the historical simulation-based justifications that we want, but the map presents challenges that are not as interesting with as many ramifications as they have. This is really about massing a lot of people in an area and then spreading them around and moving, switching these centers of gravity that you're trying to abstract the advance of enemy troops. The central area is still interesting here, but then you have these other areas on the sides that are more elongated, and they simply offer less. They simply offer less maneuverability, less subtleties. It's just about pounding in one or two directions, and that's it. So I just find the map to be a little less interesting. In conclusion, if Warriors of Japan had been released first, I would say, wow, that's a great game. I like all of the innovations that we have here. The map is not all that great, but what can you do? My judgment will still be positive with a minus, I would say, in the organization of the map. Comparison with Warriors of God, some players will say, oh, I'm glad that Warriors of Japan fixes the problem that I had with Warriors of God, which was that huge random element coming from the intergenerational scope covered by the game. To me, that is precisely what makes this game so special. So this game doesn't have that attractive element. Warriors of God has a more playable map, more interesting to play, and one that doesn't produce nearly as much clutter. So if I were to choose between the two, absolutely Warriors of God would be my first choice. Warriors of Japan somehow feels a little more rudimentary, and there's nothing wrong with it because it was, in a sense, that it was the first experimentation. But I just feel that in Warriors of God, they really refined the core ideas that were in Warriors of Japan, and they're perfectly fine per se, and made them so much stronger, and made the game so much more fascinating. Not for everybody due to its unique flow, but to me an incredibly strong game. This is a still strong game, but not nearly as much as it could. I find that it's a good game, but after the blast I had playing Warriors of God, I was hoping to have a similar experience with Warriors of Japan, and that didn't happen. I find it to be a good design, probably even a very good design, weakened by production. I wish that the production had been a little more pragmatic and less, maybe less aesthetically pleasing, but just more playable. So it's a good game, not nearly as good, in my very humble opinion, as its younger brother, but it's a good game, weakened by a production that is not as playable as it could.